Right now, we're officially in the year of 2022. According to a lot more political scientists or experts in the international relations, and they believe the year of 2022 for international communities, and also down the road, 5 years ahead of us, China is going to make some major big moves, not only domestically, but also internationally. But meanwhile, if you follow the news lately, let's put on China on the side. Top US and Russian diplomats said they had constructive talks lately in Geneva, but they did not achieve a breakthrough in their attempt to defuse tensions regarding the Russian troop buildup on the Ukraine-Russian border. The head of the U.S. delegation, Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, said in a separate briefing that, I quote, "One country cannot change the borders of another's by force," end quote. So that's why right now in this episode, I think it's so critical to understand now not only this bilateral relations between Russia and Ukraine, and again, any minute the conflict could happen. But meanwhile, let's bring China back into this picture. How should we understand this trilateral relations, and also including the US, today? So that's why I can't find a better person than analyzing and explaining more to us than our old friend Andy. Andy Timchenko of the Ukrainian Institute of Politics joined our show this time, and he's an expert in political analysis. And he's responsible for performing various kinds of research in the fields of sociology, geopolitics, psychology, statistics, etc. Andy, welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you for having me. Well, happy to see you.
Absolutely. Happy New Year, my brother. Now, again, when I invite you on the show, I guess this is not really a light or easy topic that for us to understand. And as I mentioned in the intro, right now, the tension between Russia and Ukraine, it's not only the word intensive, but also it's very sensitive. But before we discuss this matter, I want you to help us to understand. Andy, from your perspective, how would you describe the personality or even the characteristics of Vladimir Putin at this moment?
Well, like if you observe the story, the history of Russia for the previous 20 years, since the time when President Vladimir Putin came to power in 1999, well, as you remember, he's a Secret Service officer in the past. So his kind of personality is very silent, very careful, very diplomatic, but at the same time, he's very decisive. When it comes to use the force, he's ready to do that. And in this light, I would take the words of the Russian diplomacy very seriously. So, as I said, when the rhetoric of Russian diplomacy became so tough, in December, I would take it very seriously. And as I said before, based on my analysis of the current situation in U.S. foreign policy and overall condition of American society, the West and the United States are not ready to step in to protect Ukraine against Russian potential invasion. Because right now, unfortunately, we have to bring this up. So there's indeed a risk of a full-scale military invasion of Russia and Ukraine. And the West, and NATO, and the United States are not likely to help.
Well, Andy, again, let's go back to what you said before. And I quote, you just said, if we should take Russians' attitude seriously. And then my following question is, why is Vladimir Putin doing this? And he knew clearly that, again, I agree with what you said, at this moment, U.S. foreign policy has failed drastically. Okay? So in other words, U.S. has not taken any positive initiatives towards any international crisis, given the condition, domestically speaking, COVID-19, unemployment rate, the approval rating of Joe Biden, again, nothing seems so positive for the U.S. So U.S. is not going to do anything to help this major issue. So does that mean that provide a leeway for Russia to take advantage of this opportunity in order to make the message clear to the world?
I would say, like, if you remember the theory of geopolitics by John Mackinder, if you remember, like one century ago, he drew a map of the world where he drew so-called heartland, which is Russia, and so-called sea power, which is the United States and the United Kingdom. I'm afraid that this tension between Russia and the West is inevitable. So, like, the West enjoyed some decade of, we call it a unipolar world. After dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, United States enjoyed a true hegemony, a true dominance in the geopolitics. And the first sign that Russia is going to recover and going back to the world stage was the 2007 speech in the German city of Munich, if you remember. Like many experts in my country is like mark this speech back in 2007 when then President Vladimir Putin warned the United States. Well, like he put it very diplomatically. It was clear to the public what he was saying. That he's back in. I want to underline this, emphasize this. That back in 2007, Vladimir Putin had already warned the West that they had to stop, just spreading NATO all over the place, keeping to include new member states more and more and more, like, as I said, back in 2007, it was already clear that Russia is strongly against it. And I want to remind you that there was a military conflict in Georgia. I'm talking not about Georgia as
the state, right? We were talking about the country, right?
As a country, like not far away from Ukraine. And there was a 5-day military aggression of Russia against Georgia, right during the Olympic Games in Beijing, by the way. There was Olympic Games in Beijing in 2008.
Right.
And there was a military aggression of Russia against Georgia right in the middle of the Olympic Games in 2008. So there was already a sign. It was 13 years ago. It was already clear that Russia would fight, would stand hard on preventing the West from, expanding NATO in the Eastern Europe. It was already clear back then. So what is going on right now in Ukraine in 2022 is not a surprise. It's just an axis of this confrontation, which is inevitable between Russia and the West. As I said, there are lots of theories of geopolitics, but personally, I prefer John Mackinder and his world map, where Iran and Russia belong to the so-called heartland, and United Kingdom, Australia, United States belong to the so-called sea power, and they are eternal enemies, to put it this way. So, as I said, starting from 2007 speech in Munich, and then continuing the military aggression in Georgia in 2008, we just see how this trend goes on of Russia trying to stop NATO or the United States from expanding their influence in Eastern Europe. So, as I said before, what we see right now in Ukraine and around Ukraine is not a surprise. It was predictable and it was inevitable. The only problem right now is how we're going to sort this out.
Right.
Because Ukraine is going to be, I'm afraid to say this, Ukraine is going to be the battlefield. Ukrainians are going to be those who are going to get most casualties, most suffering, etc., etc. I'm afraid to say that.
Well, Andy, before we get to what would happen if the war takes place, okay? So before we get to that, Not too long ago, I finished reading a book. Again, it was talking about some of the major events happened in World War II. And I distinctively remember one sentence that the author put was when Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, when everyone was trying to underestimate the power of Germany, which led by Adolf Hitler, Winston Churchill came out in a speech. He said, again, I'm paraphrasing it, is if we if we underestimate the power of Germany, as if we were scratching the head of a crocodile and expect the crocodile to purr. Come to this moment, and I think it's more fitting to describe Russia this way as well, because normally if you said Vladimir Putin was a quiet person, normally we don't see a lot more reactions, or we don't see a lot more excited characteristics coming out of this person. No, at this moment, I think the U.S. is fumbling with a wrong person, or it's fumbling with the wrong game. So in other words, it's kind of scratching the head of a crocodile and expect the crocodile to purr. Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, and as I said, when we talk about personality of Vladimir Putin, let me bring up personality of Biden. Like, I don't want to insult anybody, but like he's a very old person,
right?
Like, and I was reflecting on that in his mind, he's still in Cold War. Like, it's still like, there was a funny thing when a Secretary of Defense of the United States had a visit in Ukraine. Like, he gave away, like, he said Soviet Union instead of Russia. Like, he said, like, quote, like, we will prevent the invasion of the Soviet Union in Ukraine. So, like, in their minds, in the minds of U.S. government, they still, like, live in the reality of Cold War, when it was Soviet Union, but, like, 30 years, that look, we don't have Soviet Union anymore for 30 years. But back in their minds, they're like, the U.S. government, they are stuck in the past. They're not moving forward. And even worse, that they are stuck probably in 2001, when, if you remember, United States could afford invading Afghanistan, or 2 years later in 2003, United States could afford invading in Iraq. They were so strong, so powerful. And the United States knew that nobody could confront them. Like, if you remember the invasion of Iraq, nobody opposed. Like, remember that Germany and France, they were like, they were neutral. So I don't remember if they supported the U.S. invasion of Iraq, but they didn't oppose it too harshly, So, and I'm afraid that, U.S. government, they are stuck in Cold War, or at least they're stuck in the reality of 2001 or 20 years have passed, and today's reality is different. Russia grew stronger. You can say whatever you want. When former politician John McCain once called Russia a gas station, Russia is rich with oil, and he tried to sort of taunt Russia, say, you just have oil and nothing else. The reality is different. Russia has only oil, but it was still enough to fund the new arms, new inventions, new tanks, new aircraft, new missiles, everything. So now, I heard that in quite many, although I'm not a military expert, but I heard that in many, many fields of military equipment, Russia is now the world's top country. Even better than the United States in many ways, in missiles, ultrasound missiles, all this stuff. Again, I'm not a military expert, I'm not deep into this, but Russia has a lot to say against U.S. plans to for example, deploy missiles in Ukraine, for example.
Well,
So, yeah, Russia has a lot to say.
Indy, let me ask that question. We always say, since again I agree with you that Russia over the decades has grown tremendously, not only economically speaking, but also militarily speaking. But I want to go back to the simple question is, when we see the troop buildup at the border between Russia and Ukraine, what message is Russia government trying to send not only to Ukraine but also to the international community? Because again, this is not a random event. This is not an overnight decision. So this has been drawn by the Russia government for so long. It's just a matter of time that Russia government or Vladimir Putin can play the card well. So that's why I want to ask you is, let's go back to the basic, simple question. What message is Vladimir Putin or the Russian government is trying to send to U.S. or to the rest of the world today?
Russia is trying to retake the position and power of the former Soviet Union as it was before 1991. Like, I discussed this matter with other experts in Ukraine. They say, okay, like maybe the risk of the military invasion in Ukraine is just one of the options. We also have other options, how Russia can, like, play hard with the West. Like, for example, they can deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus or in Venezuela, for example, by the way. If you remember, Caribbean crisis, missile crisis of 1962, if you remember, when the Soviet Union deployed missiles in Cuba, if you remember. So the Soviet Union deployed nuclear weapons in Cuba and was very close to the main American cities, New York, Florida.
That's right.
And that move really made the West to step back. So actually, this move to deploy missiles in Cuba was a countermeasure because NATO was deploying missiles in Turkey. Turkey is very close to Russia. So there was a countermeasure of the Soviet Union to respond to deploy missiles in Cuba. So right now, I predict this one of the options, apart from the risk of military invasion in Ukraine, Russia can deploy, for example, nuclear weapons in Venezuela, as one of the options. Yeah, because right now we have a very friendly government in Venezuela. Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the options I would consider. A new pivot, I would say that we live in a new Cold War for a long time already. Like, I don't know, we can say that it was in 2007. Personally, I prefer to start counting the new Cold War in 2008. Since the start of the aggression against Georgia. Right. So that was 13 years ago when, Russia showed that it was ready to respond tough militarily by invading Georgia.
Andy, I wanna bring in another country coming to the picture. That will be my home country, China. We always say that given the condition before 2022, the tension between US and China, politically speaking, was indescribable. So in other words, neither of the side was willing to barge, but neither of the side was willing to cave and willing to take a step back, because we all believe that, tit for tat, that's the universal, skill that we are looking for. But meanwhile, to the America today, that the strong ties or strong relationship, this coalition between China and Russia pose great threat, not only that we say militarily speaking, but also politically and also culturally speaking to the Western countries. So I want to know that from your perspective, how do you see that China is going to play the role in this tension between the US and Russia today? What do you think, if anything were to happen, what would China react, or how would China react to this type of a hypothetical conflict?
In my opinion, China understands that, China has already become the world's largest economy, like the largest GDP, largest country in terms of production, in terms of telecommunications, like, 5G, or I heard about 6G internet. But at the same time, China has a quite limited coastline. And unfortunately, there's sometimes very unstable relations with neighboring countries. So my point is that, unfortunately, or I would say that China understands that there is no other option than to try to suppress the possible U.S., hostile actions. You name it, like South China Sea, like Taiwan, anything. China just sees no other options.
Right.
Then the same way as Russia, by the way. That going back to the John Mackinder and his world map. There's no room for attempts to contain neither Russia nor China. And although I would say this countries if you listen to diplomacy of Russia or China, very peaceful rhetoric, very peaceful.
That's right.
Despite their enormous size and power of both Russia and China, the rhetoric is very peaceful all the time. Except for the recent time, when it's literally no other option. There was a press conference of President Putin in December when he said and I think he was quite honest when he was saying that he said something like that. We told the West many times, please do not meddle in Ukraine, do not deploy troops, do not deploy missiles in Ukraine. Ukraine is indeed a red line for Russia. Do not do that. But you're making us to take some countermeasures against you. We do not want that. We do not need that. But you are forcing us to be more decisive, to make some steps against you. And I think that China in general feels the same way.
Andy, let me ask you, do you think, again, I am not trying to insult or I'm not trying to blame anyone, but do you think at this moment that Joe Biden has already lost the credibility in Russia and in China? So in other words, we tend to say US has the finger in every single pie, which it shouldn't. Okay? Many times that it doesn't matter where the Secretary of the State, Tony Blinken's, wherever he travels, he always brings up the matters regarding China's human rights, regarding the sovereignty of Taiwan, regarding all these domestic issues which has no direct relationship or benefits to the U.S. And again, going back to what you said before, it's to Ukraine and again to Russia, all these ongoing matters. But when we look at this general picture, U.S. has not done one single thing that really softened this issue except for words. So that's why I want to ask you is, do you think at this moment that Joe Biden, his foreign policy team, or his, foreign policy administration has already lost the credibility and he's just buying the time until the next president or until the successor to take over to reshape the policy towards China and Russia? Do you think that?
Yes, I heard from many experts in Ukraine that, in general, Joe Biden is seen as a weak leader. I mean, not only because of his age, to all my respect to the age of a person, but it just if you look at his biography, it's okay, he was a senator, he was a diplomat, but he's not a strong leader, to tell you the truth. In all regards, I'm not just saying he's very old. He's just not a kind of personality that is a good leader, a strong leader. Like even Trump was a much stronger leader. Like he was a much clearer narrative. Like I'm not saying that I'm not that I support Trump. Like I'm just stating the facts that, like in my opinion, like even Trump was more decisive than Biden. And yeah. And by the way, this could be the circumstance Russia want to exploit when Russia feels, although I would say that President Putin is also not very young, but he's still younger than
Joe Biden. Right.
Yeah, President Biden. So Russia can take a chance and exploit this opportunity when they feel the weakness of the U.S. leadership. And recently I had a talk with an American professor from New York, and in a private conversation, he told me that the United States is tired of losing wars. It was said by the American professor from New York. Well, like if we look retrospectively throughout the 20th century or beginning of the 21st century, I would say that there are at least some exceptions, but in general, U.S. military campaigns, like you name it, Korean War. There was a movie about Chosin Reservoir.
Right.
That's a failure of U.S. military. Then Vietnam War. Yeah, like we can call a Gulf War of 1991 a success, but like again, Afghanistan is a failure. The Taliban came to power very quickly, and then the invasion of Iraq brought no major success to the United States. In fact, Iraq, after Saddam Hussein, just became a source for the ISIS. Like if you remember, Iraq became the source of the ISIS, unfortunately, because there was complete collapse of any political power. Just the country was sunk into chaos, and out of that chaos, we saw just Islamic fundamentalists such as ISIS. Unfortunately, like for 70 years or so, there were very few military successes of the United States. Very few.
Andy, I want to go back to the question. I mean, not only the question, but the content. Let's bring China back into this picture again. Not too long ago, I talked to one of the renowned international journalists, and he mentioned something quite interesting. He said, and I think I mentioned this before, for the following 5 years or even 10 years down the road, for Chinese president, the goal is to create a long-lasting legacy. Now, how do you interpret that sentence? What does that mean for the Chinese leader to create this long-lasting legacy, not only just about the One Belt, One Road initiative, the Belt and Road Project, but also really strengthen this international relationship between China and the countries in Africa, China and the countries in the Middle East? And again, it seemed to be the case that China is pinpointing its position strategically everywhere. So what is your take for 2022 and so forth? What do you think that China is trying to do, not only domestically, but also internationally?
I would think that the primary goal is to unite all Chinese within one country that has no borders. I would put it this way. So all ethnic Chinese must be united within one country. I mean, I try to be very discreet and diplomatic. So
sure. Yeah. So do you see? I mean, do you see this? Do you see this personal relationship between the Chinese president with other leaders are going to be elevated? I mean, the friendship are going to be elevated, or some countries are still sitting on the bench waiting to see how China is going to play out its own pictures. What is your take on this?
I think that the plans of leaving the legacy will be true. China will not allow whoever to contain China.
Right.
I mean the South China Sea I mean, the New Silk Road. Like, by the way, if you remember, there was some unrest in the Kazakhstan. If you remember, like a week ago, there was a very hot topic in Ukraine.
Right.
There was a very, very harsh unrest in Kazakhstan. And I remember that President Xi Jinping announced the One Road, One Belt initiative in Kazakhstan in 2013 on his visit to Kazakhstan. He said that China would like to restore the New Silk Road and One Belt, One Road initiative. So all in all, in conclusion, China will not allow whoever to contain China. And China will unite all ethnic Chinese within one country that has no borders. I would put it this way. And the New Silk Road initiative is just an instrument, just a tool for providing ethnic Chinese with prosperity and eliminating poverty.
Andy, I know you're fairly busy. I have two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about Russia and China again. Belt and Road Initiative involved more than 60 countries today, especially the countries in Southeast Asia, such as Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, etc. China has invested billions of dollars into helping those countries in terms of infrastructure projects, domestic economic growth, and etc. But meanwhile, a lot of people say that the reason why for China to invest heavily in those countries, they are trying to create what we call energy debt or a resources debt. So do you think that China is actually playing a wrong game? Or, not a wrong game. China is really trying to picture a wrong concept to those countries? Or China is actually genuinely, sincerely doing a favor to this country because they are the partners with China?
I would say that, if we work in the world of, finance, if using your terms, China does the same as International Monetary Fund. So it lends money and expects something in return. But if I compare Chinese initiative in, as you said, Southeast Asia, well, China does I just want to bring this up. So when Ukraine borrows money from International Monetary Fund, it's just not about money. International Monetary Fund also has some political agenda, political requirements, and some. So as I said, it's not just about money. But as far as I know, when you cooperate with China and borrow money from China, it's just all about business. You just get the money, you borrow the money, and then you pay it back with interest. That's it. As far as I know, China never accompanies its money with political requirements. China doesn't tell you that, okay, you have to be this one, or you have to stick to this ideology, or you have to do this one, human rights, all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. So it's just business. So I would say, if comparing Chinese approach in Southeast Asia and, for example, International Monetary Fund, I would say that working with China is more preferable. I would say that. This is my personal opinion. Yeah.
Thank you, Andy.
So I wouldn't use this term that China is wrong or right. It's just about doing business. That's it. Nothing more.
Andy, my last question, again, that could fall into your research is, in the long run, 2022, so forth, how do you think that China and Russia could collaborate more effectively in order to create this harmonious and peaceful picture for rest of the international community? Because, again, today we always talk about U.S. and China, U.S. and Russia. But right now, I think it's time to address this bilateral ties between China and Russia in a more meaningful way. So from your perspective, let's end the conversation with the last question is, how do you think that China and Russia could work more effectively in 2022 and so forth?
I heard from many experts in Ukraine and Russia that that, well, at some point, Russia and China complement each other very harmoniously. So, for example, when Russia excels in the field of some military field, right? Let's put it this way. China excels in economics. China is the world's, powerhouse, the world's biggest manufacturer of goods, like you name it, anything. Like literally, it's hard to say that something that is not made in China nowadays. So I think that Russia and China complement each other. From while one country complements another militarily, another complements other economically. And I see a harmonious coexistence here, like both military and economic, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, it's always interesting to see that how each country, especially China, US, Russia, and Ukraine, and so many other countries, are going to play their cards carefully and also going to play their cards strategically for this year. So with that said, again, Andrew Timchenko, all the way from Ukrainian Institute of Politics, and he's an expert in political science and also responsible for many issues regarding sociology, geopolitics, psychology, and statistics. Andy, thank you so much for taking your time to join our show. And again, it's always appreciative to hear your insights and your meaningful input regarding this international community. And we pray and hope for this year that your work is going to prosper. And we love to have you back on the show again, not only just about Russia and Ukraine, but let's talk about more about the international community. Thank you, Andy.